So we're still continuing in our register file. We're going to talk about this in the combination with the user registration form, but you can see we have a lot of details here. A lot of it is validation, and there's a lot of other ways to do this for validation. You can use object-oriented techniques and things like that to make the code slimmer, but it will become more complex if you're not an object-oriented type programmer. Now we've already tested for inserting the right data into the database. Now we just want to move down the line here, and then we're going to talk about what happens with the user registration and why it might get sent back. Well, the first thing we do is check for that email like I mentioned. So we're doing a select into that table users table, and we're using something called a count. Count around a field is going to get the count for that field in a particular table, and then you're going to need a where clause that's going to say where the email is equal to, in this case, the session email. And that's going to check for the email that we have in the session, because after we processed all the post fields, the post parameters, then we can use the session because we put everything in the session. Once we know that everything's going to be fine, then the session is going to be okay to use at this point. And again, the debug here, you can echo out the SQL statement if you turn that debug on, which is pretty cool. So then we're going to connect to the database. You can see we're using pconnect, MySQL pconnect to do that. And again, not so robust with the or die, using the session variables to log in with the password and the login and the server. Select the database that we want based on that session variable again that we set with the session init. And that's going to actually be the query that we're dealing with there. So you can see down a little further, the results from that query. There's the query. You can see that we can have some errors that are processed, but not as robust as I have mentioned in the earlier videos. And we're going to use fetch row because this is going to be what we need in this case. Based on the result, which is coming from the query result, we're going to check a row. Now we check the 0 element because we're only picking the email, and specifically it's going to come back as a count. And we're checking to see if this is going to be greater than 0. So we're checking the count. So if it's greater than 0, then that email already exists in the database. We're going to send a yellow flag back to the form using the resend to form function, and that just processes the information to get it ready to go back to the form after we update the session. All right, so now after that, if we clear all of this so far, we check the email to see if it's in the database, in that table. Now we just have to encode using MD5 the password. Now this is like a one-way ticket. Basically, when you get a password and then you use the MD5 function, you want to look that up, this is going to insert that into the database, and that's not going to be a clear text that somebody that can actually go into your database can see the password directly there. We don't want people to see that password directly, not even the people who work on the website, because oftentimes your passwords may be something you use quite often. So MD5 ensures that it goes into the database correctly, and from there, anytime you come back in and check, you have to always use MD5, and it's really like a one-way ticket. You can check it out on the php.net site. It's going to encrypt it, and you can't do the reverse of it, so it's not going to be reversible. But when you check the passwords, you just check the before password and the confirm password, and then if you MD5 both of those, then it's going to be equal. So there's no way to actually try to go in reverse, and that's something important to know. But it's quite effective, and it's a good way to do encryption for passwords. And then we just insert the data from there into the database based on all those fields. And you can see we already put quotes around everything, so we don't need to put quotes around anything here. The quotes are already contained in the fields that require it. And we know from an insert that we use parentheses for the column list. Make sure that adds up to the same as the parentheses here that separate the values. It has to all be equal, and it's comma separated. So you can echo this out. There's no debug here, but you can echo this out if you want to see what it looks like. But it looks similar to the other inserts that we've used. And then we're going to execute the query, get a result. You could check and test for that result to see if it's false. There's a special thing that comes out when you have an identity column in your database. An identity column is something that is going to increment based on data that's inserted into the database. It's going to insert a unique number based on a starting point, and it's going to increment it by 1 or however you want it to increment. There's different ways you can do that. And when you do something like that, you get back what is called an insert ID. So you want to look up this function as well for much more details on that. But when that happens, when you insert something, that identity column is inserted, a value is placed there, and then you can get it back from what the server did into this column here. And this is what you're going to send as a username to the user using the send mail function. And you can see the send mail functions right here. It takes a user ID and a password, and the user ID is exactly what I said, the insert ID that we got back from the database. Not a problem. You've seen similar things when we worked with the database section, so that should be pretty clear. When you look at the data, it's just an ID, and it's usually the first field there in the table, and that's how you do it. There's really no other way to describe it other than to talk about it for about an hour or two, at least. But this is definitely something that you can look up and use to your advantage. Databases in general can really take a lot of time to understand, and this is really getting you started. You might have a few questions, so you have to really persevere and dive into it a little bit more, repeat the videos as you need to. All the information is really here. And then you have the session variables passed back to that mail. Check out the mail videos to see how that works. Very easy to do that. We mail it based on the email address, welcome to our site message, and then we echo it out here, just like we did before, replacing the carriage return here with the BR break for outputting it in the browser here so we can see the results. And then we just have the resend to form. We reset that post so we can actually check the post again and send everything back as it was sent to us. So we send it directly back, just taking the post, updating the session variables as we're used to, and then we use the header location here, response redirect, to go back to that page, and the flags are going to be in place. And we've talked about what flags we're going to have up here. We've talked about that. If you don't have enough data, if you have the wrong data, if things aren't the right size, etc., then we're going to go back to the page. And in the user registration page, pretty easy, not that much difference here as far as looking at the data. We've already looked at this a little bit. We're going to check this right here. We use the same AR fields here. We're going to reset that, and we're going to actually check to see if the sessions are set. If they are, we check to see if something's null. If it is, we make it an empty string. And then we check these session variables for those special variables that I mentioned that are going to update the JavaScript at the bottom of the page. And incidentally, this has to be at the bottom of the page for that JavaScript. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because when you parse the page, those fields have to be in place. So you have to do it at the very end after the page has been sent to the browser, and it's really the last thing you're going to do. So you really need to keep it there at the bottom, just for your information. But then back at the top, we set those to 0 if they weren't set, just so we don't have non-integer data there. And now we check to see if this flag was set using HTTP get bars, and that's going to get the flag if it was set. And if it's one of these cases here in the switch statement, yellow, red, blue, pink, white, whatever you want to put there, switch statement, then we're going to put in a message, and that message is going to display at the top here. That's where it's going to go. And we format it correctly. It's echoed out only if there's an error. Otherwise, there's no error. Check the default case for the switch. And that's pretty much how it works. It's very easy. You can check out the database as we're used to. It's the same table that we've been using and pretty much the same type of form we've already talked about. And this is how it works in a complete sense, not just having bits and pieces here and there, but as a complete example. And you can test it as you need to.